North Korea's Kim Jong-un has traveled outside of his country for the first time since inheriting power in 2011. He made the trip by train to China, where he met with Chinese President Xi Jinping. The two leaders likely discussed economic sanctions against the Kim regime and upcoming talks with President Trump. Well, joining us with some insights is Dr. Carl Minzner. He's an expert in Chinese law and governance and professor of law at Fordham University. He's also the author of a new book called End of an Era: How China's Authoritarian Revival is Undermining Its Rise. Dr. Minzner, thank you so much for joining us today. Got to get right on with the news here. Xi Jinping met with Un. He was one of the most Googled names recently, Xi was. So what's he up to?
Well, certainly, I think Kim is certainly interested in making sure that his relations with China are solid in advance of the upcoming potential meeting with Trump. So I think that's what's on Kim's mind. For Xi, he's also very interested in trying to understand what's going on with Kim, worried about instability on his northeast frontier.
Yeah, he seems like he's very concerned about that. I think he said at one time, you're causing instability here for China and the whole region. So what do you think they were discussing?
Well, I certainly think Xi wants to know what Kim is planning to do with respect to nuclear proliferation issues. And as you highlighted, I think one of Xi's top concerns is implications on his border that might impact domestic stability inside China itself, which is Xi Jinping's top priority.
Sure, if there's fire and fury unleashed by President Trump, that is not good for China. So I understand that President Un had not ever sent anyone from his regime to China during his time at the leadership at the helm there. He's been in power since 2011. Why do you think he's never sent anyone to China?
Well, China in the past year or so has ramped up controls on trade with North Korea. North Korea itself has a complex relationship with mainland China. On the one hand, certainly China is its biggest ally, but on the other hand, North Korea has a history of not wanting to become too dependent on any of its neighbors, including China itself. So it's a very complex relationship that the two have.
So do you think the sanctions are starting to bite a bit, especially with China honoring many of them?
I certainly think the increased pressure is one of the things that's top on Kim's mind. There have been reports that some of those sanctions, even if they're not completely enforced, have begun to bite in North Korea. And so that's opening up some possibility, some willingness on the part of North Korea to at least discuss some of these issues.
I want to get back to President Trump's upcoming meeting with Kim Jong-un. It is set for May. What role do you expect China will play leading up to that meeting, and any predictions on the likely outcome?
I've got no idea. I mean, it's a very unpredictable what's going to come out of the meeting between Trump and Un. Those are two very unpredictable men, and it's not clear what could happen. I think the Chinese are they're worried about the unpredictability. They're worried about the possibility of a war. I think they're also worried about the possibility that some significant instability could lead to an influx of North Korean refugees across the border. So they don't want the North Korean regime to fall, but they also don't want a nuclear war. So they're a little bit torn as to what to do.
How much influence does China actually have on North Korea?
It has some because they do control these trade routes. They've got the ability to clamp down, but they don't have an unlimited ability, because if they did fully clamp down, that could throw the domestic politics into North Korea into a tailspin, which then could create these domestic implications, such as a flood of refugees for themselves. So, yes, they have some influence, but they're also unwilling and worried about how much they could use against North Korea. North Korea itself isn't simply a tail that the Chinese wag. It really is a independent entity that has balanced between China, Russia, formerly the Soviet Union, South Korea, and the United States. So they really try to play their own game, even if they're very dependent on mainland China.
And I know Germany was a different situation back in 1989 when the Berlin Wall came down. No one really expected to see a unified Germany. Today we have a very strong unified Germany. Might the same thing happen on the Korean Peninsula? Would we all be surprised by that?
It's hard to imagine how that could take place. The differences between North Korea and South Korea are dramatic. I mean, the level of economic development, the political systems are vastly different. And so you would almost, in order to imagine that happening, you'd have to imagine a full-scale collapse of the North Korean regime, which would then lead to a lot of instability in North Korea itself, and then these implications for China, the United States, South Korea, all getting pulled in some form. So some kind of rapid reunification, I don't see that immediately in the future.